I think more along the lines of discovery as opposed to invention. When you're in that frame of mind, there's some symbolism in the flight path of a butterfly. It's definitely directional. It's going from point A to point B, but it's circuitous. It's not linear. And that's what we've experienced, what we see in the context of innovation and discovery.
Hi, Karl. How you doing?
Hey, Erum. I'm doing great. How's your week going?
It's going great. I see trees blossoming. I had gone to DC to see the blossoms. And then I went to our beloved Brooklyn Botanical Gardens yesterday and just frolicked around with my husband and son. And I'm just in good spirits.
Were the cherry blossoms blooming at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden?
Only by the Japanese area, not the full main row. I think that's going to happen in a couple of weeks.
And in DC, were they blooming?
We got there at post bloom.
Oh,
it's still nice, but it wasn't like super fluffy, how it can look when it's peak.
Yeah.
And it had rained and was windy right before we went. So there's a lot on the ground. It looked like it was snowing.
Yeah, I love this time of the year because there's no better reminder of nature's power and its cyclicness, I guess, than the flowers blooming and the trees starting to push out their leaves. I've mentioned it before. We've got a plum tree in the backyard, so seeing those flowers come out and seeing all the birds that are out there is pretty special.
Even those aggressive damn blue jays.
Exactly, that drive our cat crazy. So the big news, I guess if we want to just briefly go into it, was that former President Trump was arraigned in Manhattan, and that caused a lot of attention. I feel like the whole news cycle was just dominated by the news, which was historic because no president has previously been indicted of crimes. I think it's a pretty tough for a lot of people, but I also think that the wheels of justice have shown that they're resilient and continue to move forward. What do you think it means for science?
I listened to when Trump actually addressed his people. It was live, and it was just so clear he was lying because he was just throwing out statistics and numbers, but he said it with such conviction. And I think that's where the danger lies because it sounds like he knows what he's talking about sometimes. There was a lot of mumbling and rambling, which he oftentimes does, but again, he does that with conviction too. And I think that also is tough for people in our field who are more scientifically inclined. And it's tough for science because he's not telling the truth. He's just putting out numbers, and we need more truth. And oftentimes truth comes from science. And obviously there's beauty and art. We don't want to leave that out. But in this case, it was very frustrating to hear what he was saying. It made me a little bit obviously sad and depressed. And I don't follow Trump that much. There's bigger fish to fry in terms of how are we going to get to Mars. Like that's the cosmic perspective.
Yeah. How about just climate change?
Yeah,
but
there we go.
I think you bring up a good point because there are a lot of people out there. First of all, we frequently talk about science literacy, and most people have very little science education, unfortunately. And the truth is that most of the economic benefit that happens in the United States could probably be directly tied to basic science and investments in research and technology. And when you have a lot of people who look at science as just another religion and don't really understand it, it does make it very tough for science and scientists. Hollywood has a tradition of portraying scientists negatively. I think the statistic is 8 out of 10 scientists portrayed in Hollywood, in the media, are generally portrayed negatively. And yet it's so far from the truth because of the nobility and dedication and all the positive things that scientists do and believe that they're doing to better the world. We have a lot of opportunity to educate people, and that's what we're trying to do here on Grow Everything.
There are signs of progress, of course, especially with Biden's Bioeconomy executive order that happened recently. Well, I guess it's a continuation of the big executive order that happened last year, a few months ago. And they had a lot of goals set in place. Definitely need to read through it, but I know that you've read some of the goals. What stood out to you?
The summary was called Bold Goals for the Bioeconomy and Biomanufacturing. And a lot of them were very aggressive. The one that stood out to me was this idea of sequencing 1 million new microbes And we talked to people who we know and asked, is that really a valuable endeavor? I think there is a lot of value to sequence a lot. But on the other hand, having those sequences doesn't mean you understand the functions of all those genes that are being sequenced. And that's something we will get into in a future episode with our friends at Cultivarium who are focused on increasing the tool set for working with microbes that aren't normally worked with. So I think it's an ambitious goal. I'm not sure it's the right goal, but I think we should continue to unpack the Biden bioeconomy blueprint and what those bold goals are. But that was the one that really stood out to me. And it's very related to this idea of growing everything, which is what we are always talking about.
Yeah. Yep. And for us to unpack that executive order and all those goals and what they mean and how they could be maybe reframed is something that we need to do, because a part of Grow Everything is not just growing things like physical things through biology, but for us, we also see the meaning of even growing an audience. And that's what we do here at Messaging Lab. We work with these companies to grow the attention of what they're doing and engage with people. So I think we're trying to do that with this podcast, growing the audience. And I see that it is happening in the mainstream. I saw a preview for a show on Netflix called Unstable. And I didn't get to watch the first episode, but it is about a biotech company, I believe. And it stars Rob Lowe, who is very funny. I know he had different roles. He was like the heartthrob back in the day. He's still very attractive, but he was really funny in Parks and Recreation. So I renewed appreciation for him. And I think in this role on the show Unstable, he still plays a comical role. I can't wait to watch that and see what it's really about.
So there's another show on Netflix called Biohackers, which is a German show that is about a lot of the things that we talk about. It's okay. It's not a great show. That's my opinion, of course. But we do say that the mainstream media could do a much better job in terms of letting people know what's happening in these technologies. We do know that Robert Downey Jr., who plays Iron Man, he's a big investor in biotechnology. And Leonardo DiCaprio indirectly is an investor in biotech. He mostly invests in climate-related, sustainable investments, but those can be very much biotech. Currently, the fund has a rule that they don't invest in GMOs, but I think they might be seeing that GMOs doesn't mean that it's not good for the planet or something like that. But then the other thing on, just speaking to the mainstream media, a few years ago, this is probably like 5 or 6 years ago, there was news that Jennifer Lopez, her production company, had been working on a detective show called CRISPR, which is supposed to be about using biotech to solve police crimes or whatever. I don't know whatever happened with that. It's probably still stuck in development hell. So that's something we should follow up on and find out. So those are initial signals that there is some interest in biotech. And I can't wait to see what this Unstable sitcom is so that we can see if they're doing a good job. But I think we should get into our episode today. I'm excited about who we're talking to. Today, we're talking to Charles Dimmler, who is the CEO and co-founder of Checkerspot. And Checkerspot's a really interesting company because they're using microalgae to produce important chemicals. And they also have a division called Wonder Alpine that is developing high-performance extreme sports equipment, meaning skis for backcountry skiing and snowboards. So we've known Charles for a while, and we're excited to have him on the pod. Charlie, we're super excited to be having this conversation.
This is the first time I heard you be called Charlie.
I introduced myself as Charles, but once we get past introductions, Charlie's great.
And actually, it was really interesting because I met you at Biofabricate, and after Karl introduced us, we started talking about a podcast and the concept of one. And now you will be the 20th episode that publishes. So it was an idea, and now here we are on this conversation.
That's a lot of progress. You guys should be really psyched.
Why don't you kick it off by telling us what was the founding story of Checkerspot, what inspired you, and what is Checkerspot?
Checkerspot is a materials company, and we're utilizing biotechnology to access unique chemistries of oils that lend themselves to improved physical functional properties of materials, or that can be used as functional ingredients that make products better. And at the core of what we're doing is working with single-celled organisms, microalgae to be specific, that we grow in a fermentation-based process. So we're feeding sugar to microalgae that then metabolize that sugar to produce oil. And oil, as an alternative to petroleum, fossil fuels, oil as an alternative to commodity-based vegetable oils like palm or soy or canola. But what we're really excited about is that we can access unique structures, unique types of oils that grow naturally on the planet, but have never really been interrogated or explored, because those oils or those plants that produce the oils, they don't grow in the arable regions of the world. They don't grow in the Midwest or in Malaysia, as examples. In other words, they don't lend themselves to the established agroeconomic complex that we have. But what biotechnology or biomanufacturing more specifically has unlocked is the ability to access the genes from those plants and plug them into a microbial expression system, microalgae, to be able to produce at large scale and at an attractive cost structure. And that's what we're bringing to life with Checkerspot's Wing platform. So we got started 6 years ago. We were founded in the summer of 2016. And today we're commercializing 5 different materials and ingredients. Our point of entry into the market has been outdoor recreation as a way to bring to life and to demonstrate, to showcase what's possible with the Wing platform. Even though the company is only 6 years old, it's a little bit deceiving because we're building on the shoulders of now more than 15 years of history. And that history was really important in the formation, the foundation of Checkerspot, because during that time, my co-founder and I recognized that this technology is real, that it scales, that we could pursue a business model based on fully scaled commercial production of oil from microalgae. What we have evolved, or what I think is perhaps different than what's come before, is the way that we're commercializing, the strategy and where we've entered into the market, and then ultimately how we have a vision of empowerment, a vision of really making these tools, these technologies, the materials, the ingredients available to third parties up and down the value chain. And 6 years in, that's now really coming to life with our portfolio of customers and partners and the commercial traction that we have.
You say you ferment the oils from microalgae. You did say you feed the microalgae sugar. That means they're not photosynthetic the way that we would normally think about algae. Why is that? What's the advantage of fermenting versus growing them outside or needing sunlight to grow the microalgae?
The advantage is scale and cost. What we found is the ability to drive yield, productivity, and titer up in a fermentation-based process. The ability to leverage fermentable sugar, which does come from photosynthesis. So plants, whether that's corn or whether that's sugarcane or sorghum or whatever the fermentable sugar source is, those plants are converting carbon dioxide and sunlight into chemical energy in the form of sugar that we're then harvesting and then feeding to this fermentation-based process and directing that carbon along the lipid biosynthesis pathway to get to unique triglycerides or unique oil. And so relative to what we've seen in the current state of the art with photosynthetic microalgae, it all comes down to scale. It comes down to commercial scale production and price.
And you also said that the oils that you guys are producing may not have been previously accessible, like nature produces these oils naturally, but previously people weren't able to access them or get them at scale. Why is that? Is it just because they were being grown in algae that people didn't know about, or you just couldn't grow them at scale? What was the reason?
The reason is because those plants, in whatever form those plants take, so not specifically perhaps microalgae, but think higher plants like trees and crops. These plants don't grow easily in the arable regions of the world. So an example of that might be a rare plant that grows in the Amazon, or a plant that's utilized for, traditional Chinese herbal remedies. There's a scarcity to these. And part of that scarcity has to do with the fact that you can't just take the seeds and plant them in the Midwest, as one example.
Tell us a bit more about the material that you created from this process of using algae and these oils.
The first 3 materials that we have come to market with, one is a textile finish that we are commercializing in partnership with a Swiss-based specialty chemical company by the name of Beyond Surface Technologies. And this textile finish is engineered for wicking. So it's a hydrophilic textile finish that pulls moisture away from the skin. In that case, what we've brought to the table is the supply of oil from microalgae, but it's really Beyond Surface Technologies, chemistry and formulations expertise that has really brought that specific product into the market. The second and third are both urethanes. One is a poured cast urethane. So poured meaning that it's in liquid form. There's an A component, a B component that when mixed together cure and solidify into a durable hard polymer. And the third is a rigid foam that's also a urethane. And there are differences in the formulations and the chemistry that we utilize. Now, all three of those materials, the textile finish, the poured cast urethane, and the rigid foam urethane, all utilize the same base oil. What's different is the way that it's brought to life in those specific materials applications.
And in the case of, it's Beyond Textiles, right? The
Beyond Surface Technologies.
Beyond Surface, yeah. In the case of their material, would they previously have used a fossil fuel derived oil as a coating, or yeah?
Yes. Yeah, they were using some petroleum derived feedstock. And one of the key milestones for them was by working with us, they achieved getting to 100% bio-based textile finish,
Amazing.
Which was, after more than a decade, a real significant milestone. The reception in the market has been strong, especially given the targets that a lot of consumer brands and Fortune 500 companies have set around carbon neutrality.
And so that kind of material, for example, would be used in a water repellent hoodie that's still able to wick sweat away from your body. Is that an accurate example?
More likely would be a base layer that you're wearing underneath your water repellent hoodie that is pulling moisture away. Yes.
Got it. And I seem to remember, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, that when I think of the urethane, I, of course, think of skateboard wheels because that's where I come from. But I seem to remember that you guys had also done potentially vinyl for vinyl records. Is that also a urethane product, or is that, again, I think I might be getting ahead of the story?
Getting a little bit ahead of the story in the sense that, one, don't want to skate past the wheels because there have been some exciting developments in that regard. And so we might want to circle back there. I would describe it a little bit differently in the context of the record. It's a non-vinyl record. It's a record that utilizes the cast urethane, but where we've achieved, through some prototyping, some really interesting milestones around the fidelity and the audio quality. And that actually was featured for certain audiences at South by Southwest the week before last, which is cool.
You guys received the Innovation Award at South by Southwest. What does it mean for Checkerspot to have won that award?
Yeah, winning the South by Southwest Award was an important milestone for a bunch of reasons, but two that I'll highlight. One is that years ago, Nina Reyes on the team went to South by Southwest to take it in, to experience it, and at the time to form a view around whether that might be a conference that we would attend in some capacity. Everybody listening is like, of course, it's an amazing conference. And like, why would you even send somebody? Shouldn't that be obvious? And in retrospect, it was, but it made such an impression on Nina, and by extension, all of us. We had this goal, this objective that one day we might be featured or we might present there. And so to fast forward and to win the Innovation Award at South by Southwest was phenomenal. It meant a lot to everybody within the organization. The second reason, though, is that the Pollinator kit, which is what won the award, is a living and breathing embodiment of how we're trying to make our technology, these materials, available to designers. And in winning the award, it's already catalyzed more inbound interest from product designers. And we've seen an uptick in the engagement across all kinds of, whether it's social media or other digital formats. And that's amazing because we, again, really want to do everything possible to make the platform and to make what we're developing available to the ingenuity, the creativity that exists out there. And the fact that the judges at South by Southwest, one, see that it resonated with them, that they developed sufficient conviction to give us the award was amazing. And so we're still celebrating and excited about it. But yeah, it also feels like still the beginning. There's a lot more that we have in the pipeline that we're working on that is similarly generating enthusiasm within the company and with our partners and customers.
Awesome. And so you guys are still creating oils, and we're trying to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels, and so many things are made from our oil-derived products. What makes the products that you guys are creating, or the oils that you're creating, less toxic and safe for the environment?
One thing to be really forthright about is in the context of the urethane specifically, we are utilizing isocyanate chemistry, and isocyanates are toxic substances and have to be utilized in a controlled environment. And so it's really important to highlight and flag it. But once the formulation cures and becomes a material, then it's inert and we don't see any toxicity in the context of human health, as an example. When we compare it to, say, a petroleum-derived polymer, a petroleum-derived polyurethane, there are a couple of considerations, two that I'll highlight. One is the sourcing of the oil that's the feedstock for the urethane. And in that regard, when we think about the process of exploring, extracting fossil fuels, there's incredible environmental consequence to the way that we've historically approached that. And I think it's important to not lose sight of it, because oftentimes the conversation shifts very rapidly to the second consideration, which is carbon and LCA, life cycle analysis. And relative to petroleum, our process end to end currently, based on third-party analysis, is a 2/3 reduction on carbon relative to petroleum. And that analysis has become a bit dated. And we now have conviction, we have a level of confidence that we can improve that even more dramatically. And we have ambition. We have sights set on not just a 2/3 reduction in carbon, but actually demonstrating that the process can be end-to-end a carbon sink. But we've got some more work to do to really bring that to life and to demonstrate it.
That's amazing.
So the urethanes that you're creating, can you tell us what type of products currently use urethanes and what you're going after? I know you're creating more of the base material, but are you creating products? Have people purchased the urethanes to create specific products? Can you tell us what's happening at the end of the cycle?
Yeah, really for us strategically, one thing that's just been paramount, that's been really important, is to identify applications that make biomanufacturing, that make the bioeconomy, perhaps more broadly, accessible, relevant, bringing the bioeconomy to everyone's doorstep. Because I might love to talk about engineering the lipid biosynthesis pathway and working with heterotrophic microalgae. And as excited as that gets me, like most people, they just want to know, how does it make for a better product? And when we think about something like urethanes, they're everywhere. They're used ubiquitously. Like the little carrier here on my iPhone, that's urethane. You have urethane in your headphones. There's urethane in all of the trim in cars, bumpers, glasses. There's urethane in bags and luggage, and it even makes its way into things like footwear and apparel. Urethane is ubiquitous. And for us, we had to make some hard choices about where to start and where to bring to life, not only that we could create something that was bio-based and not 5% bio-based, but over 50% bio-based. And we decided to start in outdoor recreation. And we started prototyping skis. There's two materials that we're now commercializing in skis, the cast urethane and the rigid foam. Both of those materials we engineered, we targeted strength to weight and damping or energy absorbing properties. We also, with the cast urethane, stumbled upon, we didn't design for it, but then we discovered that there were some really interesting adhesive properties that translate to performance in the use case, in the application, which is backcountry skiing. And yet the primary physical properties, the lightweighting and damping, those have utility in other market segments. Those have utility in places like automotive and aerospace, where both lightweighting and damping translate to energy efficiency and are highly sought after by companies that are building automobiles and aircraft as examples. And we really took inspiration from the history of the petrochemicals industry. There's a tremendous amount of ingenuity and value created when we think back to the 20th century. And one example of that would be carbon fiber, innovated back in the 70s and into the 80s. And carbon fiber started off in applications like golf club shafts and tennis rackets and bicycle frames, on the path to scale, on the path to being qualified in other markets, other applications that are arguably larger, like automotive and aerospace, which is where we see carbon fiber being deployed pretty ubiquitously today. And so we took inspiration from that. We started in outdoor recreation. And since we've been bringing that to life and have an actual supply chain, we have an actual cost structure, it's really brought the demand curve in from other players in adjacent markets that are looking for solutions, both in the context of performance properties and how to get to better products for consumers, but also to hit sustainability goals and hit those goals around carbon neutrality.
When we talked about Checkerspot, and as we've gotten to know you, we were like, this is an interesting model for a synthetic biology company. They're developing a chemical or materials, and then they also have this product testing capability by developing their own products, like you said, backcountry skis and snowboards that have their own application. Why was it important for you to have a branch of the company that focused specifically on developing applications? And do you think other synthetic biology companies should be looking at that model?
I definitely think that other synthetic biology companies should be looking at that model, although I have to acknowledge that it does introduce complexity. But I think that whatever level of complexity that the model introduces is more than offset by the point I tried to articulate a moment ago around bringing the demand curve in, by accelerating the adoption of whatever synthetic biology technology into the market with customers, especially on a B2B basis. And for us, the reason that we took the approach that we did was, one, we had past experience having developed brand based upon the creation of novel ingredients from synthetic biology that ended up just being transformative, both in seeing how powerful it can be to animate a technology platform and how it makes it more relatable, accessible, not only to consumers and partners even in adjacent markets that have nothing to do with the specific application, but also in the context of investors and capital formation, including public equity institutional investors. And so that lesson was carried forward. And when we started Checkerspot, we knew that we wanted to construct our innovation platform, which again, we call the Wing platform, to span in a vertically integrated fashion a molecular foundry, material science and chemistry, fabrication and prototyping, all the way through to consumer engagement. And the reasons for doing that include, one, having really clear directionality around product development, really in a rigorous, evidence-based, scientific manner, bringing to life the physical properties, the performance benefits of materials that we're innovating in end-use applications, which in any B2B type transaction, any partner is going to look for, they're going to need to see. Second, beyond the directionality around product development, if you go to most consumer brands today and you start talking about the power of synthetic biology and what's possible with genetic engineering and creating new monomers that have really interesting physical properties, you're speaking with an audience that has been speaking a different language historically, that's heavily rooted in petroleum-derived lexicon, to a world that has gotten overly indexed with specialization, where the factories are no longer owned by most brands. The factories are in other parts of the world. It's the factories that are buying the inputs, the feedstocks, the materials, the ingredients. And so there's this disintermediation with consumer brands. It hasn't been uncommon in our experience to speak with a consumer brand, to talk about a bill of materials for a consumer product, And for the product designer to not know what the material is exactly, to not know the specifications of the material, and to not know the origination or the original source of the material. That's more common than I think most would expect. And the relevance in all of that was if we could bring the Wing platform to life, if we could demonstrate the provenance of the materials, the physical properties of the materials, the LCA of the materials, and make it as frictionless and easy for partners and customers to adopt, then we would be able to make more progress on a more efficient and rapid basis.
That's brilliant. That is so brilliant. Specifically, when you're talking about product designers and really taking a look at what's going on in the industry and looking at a more grassroots level, like how are these product designers going to use your materials and how are they going to speak on behalf of your company? So how are you going about doing that? And why do you think it's important for people to get their hands on the materials and build their own products?
What we've seen, especially with product designers, is one, that there's a lot of ingenuity that happens outside the confines of individual corporations. I think we see a lot of brands today that talk about materials innovation capabilities, but in actual fact, when you really look closely, what they may have, not even necessarily, but what they may have is materials testing capabilities or product testing capabilities. But to really engineer and innovate base materials, by and large, this is a generalization, but by and large, that has become the domain of factories. And because of a variety of reasons, we've tapped out the permutations of what's been possible in the context of innovating for new performance properties from petroleum-derived feedstocks. And so what we're seeing is that there are brands that are looking for points of differentiation in the market, especially given a proliferation of consumer brands, really enabled by lower barriers to entry and what information technology has meant for all of us and the ability to go direct to consumer. And so there's this real thirst for creating new things that perform better, that hit LCA profiles, that really resonate with customers. And in order to manage and navigate the risks implicit with any kind of change, with any kind of innovation, what we've seen is that we need to carry a lot of that responsibility as an innovator. We need to make it as easy and as risk-free for third parties to adopt as possible.
And is that the idea behind the Pollinator kit? Could you describe what that is and how that came to be and how an innovator might get a hold of this kit and use it so they could try your materials?
Yeah, over the course of the last 2 years, we had a small pilot program, a project where we were just enabling a small set of product designers with material, and in particular, the cast urethane, which you're referring to as the Pollinator kit. And it was really eye-opening. The non-vinyl record that you mentioned before was a consequence of one designer in particular that just started playing with the material. Hey, I wonder if we could cast this and create a non-vinyl record. And quite honestly, when I first saw the application, I was like, well, that's cool, but waste, because who listens to records anymore? How's that going to scale? But turns out that I was wrong, that there's enormous growth. In fact, I just read that vinyl sales is now well over $1.4 billion globally and has surpassed CDs. Like that growth rate is shocking. And it has a lot to do with a number of factors, but it's nostalgia, it's sound quality, there's a whole set of reasons for why that category has been growing. But it's an example, one, where we wouldn't have highlighted that as a market worth potentially pursuing. And it was such a creative idea to think about this material in that context. And that's at the heart of the spirit behind what we've been doing with the Pollinator kit, is how do we lean into the ingenuity, the creativity that exists in the world outside of Checkerspot or even outside of companies. And in the short time since we launched the Pollinator kit, we've seen some really interesting, striking product applications based on the material. And look, I think that there's a comparable that again, we've taken inspiration from with digital devices like iPhones and Androids, where the engineering of the device itself is exceptional. Like the iPhone, just aesthetically, and the user interface, like all of those things are really appealing. But when you think hard about what makes it great for consumers, it's the applications. And today, like those applications aren't the monopoly of Apple. These are applications created by designers and product developers wherever in the world that have a way to bring that thing to market. And it makes for a better experience for users. And I think that that's really telling. And again, we drew inspiration from it. And our ambition is one of empowerment. It's like, how do we make these tools, these technologies available and accessible to product developers, designers around the world, and really allow their ingenuity to flourish to create better products and products that they can take to market. That when we think about the scope and the scale of something as big as climate change, one company isn't going to solve climate change on its own. We really need to think about, again, making these tools, these technologies, these materials and ingredients available more broadly, and leverage community, leverage the global community.
That pollinator kit, you mentioned earlier that creators have this thirst to build something, and the pollinator kit quenches that thirst. And I was thinking about it, and I'm like, oh, I could use that to make some toys for my son. Like I can maybe work on a project that could be like my banana bread activity that I did during COVID. Like people became really creative because they were on lockdown. What's been the buzz is as the AI is taking over a lot of the tasks that take us a long time that could free us up to do other things, maybe make some toys with the pollinator kit. So I will probably get it because now, I mean, I've been using some of these tools and I'm like, okay, now that saved me a couple hours. So let me make some bread and I can make some toys.
Yeah. And that point around designers having a thirst for it, that's what we've seen. That's what we continue to hear. There's so much enthusiasm around what is coming with the bioeconomy and biomanufacturing. And there's a segment of designers that are like, yeah, can I get my hands on it? Can I start prototyping and playing with it? And I think we should all be considering different ways to enable that.
Can you share some of the products that you've seen being made with the pollinator kit, some things that struck a chord with you?
Yeah. So we talked about the non-vinyl record. That definitely struck a chord just because of how surprising it was. And also just being wrong about, when I first saw it, that's cool, but that isn't really a product. And then all of a sudden, the enthusiasm that it has created and since catalyzed is fantastic. And that is something that I think will find its way to market in some fashion that will enable, will empower. But Checkerspot's not going to be the one to bring it to market. And it really brings that concept of empowerment to life. But other applications that kind of spring to mind range from like iPhone case as an example. There was a designer that has been utilizing the material to create surf fins, which is really interesting and cool. We've also seen a designer, I think this was posted on social media, that created eyeglass frames. That's one that we certainly hadn't done any work on. And then we've seen some examples of simple things like doing molds of toys and jewelry that have started to bring to life different applications. Those are ones that I think are safe, that we've talked about publicly. There are others that I'm a little reticent to share publicly because they're really the invention of the designers.
That's great because then you have these designers that are making toys and glasses. So the bigger brands can see that, okay, yeah, there's your proof of concept right there, Warby Parker, Mattel. There we go. We can use these type of materials to make products. And you really enabled people to speak on behalf of their ideals and also the company. So it is a win-win. So congratulations for putting that together, you and your team, of course.
Thank you.
Another congratulations in order. You recently raised your Series C. Can you tell us how much you raised and how we'll use that money?
Yeah, we raised a bit over $55 million. And the way that we're going to deploy the capital is really to help support continued expansion and commercial development activities. And what that means is continuing to explore how we can support some of the inbound demand. There are companies, not just consumer facing brands, but also other players on the value chain that have seen what we've been doing from a consumer engagement perspective with Wonder Alpine. And the magnitude of the demand has outstripped our infrastructure and capability set. And so we really wanted to build that to be in a position to respond to the inbound demand. And at the same time, we also have now gotten into some other markets like personal care and food and nutrition. And we're really thinking about triaging who to work with and how best to bring something to market. So an example of that might be within the food space, we've succeeded at developing something that, as far as we know, is a world's first that is highly sought after. Like, we knew the demand was there. And we're now going through the regulatory process so that we can commercialize it. And we're actively thinking through, is the best path forward for us to partner it, to sell it to a third party, or might we think about bringing it to market ourselves? And
is this a new ingredient?
It is.
Or
it's a
molecule?
new ingredient.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Still in the hush hush.
We haven't launched it yet, haven't talked about it publicly, but we will in the not too distant future.
We'll get you back on for that.
Yeah, that's excellent. I know I came to visit your facility there in Alameda. I was wondering if you could just describe where you are today and what it looks like, how long it took to build it, and how much of your materials can you produce there? And what does that look like as you guys expand and you to deploy this capital you just raised?
Yeah, so we're based in principally two geographies here in the San Francisco Bay Area in Alameda, which is where our headquarters is. It's where our molecular foundry is. So all of the biotechnology is based here in Alameda. And then we have a second site in Salt Lake City, Utah. And that footprint is actually larger than Alameda. Although from a people perspective, we're pretty evenly weighted 50-50 between Salt Lake City and Alameda. And in Salt Lake City, we have our material science, polymer chemistry. We also have our fabrication and prototyping capability. And so if you were to walk through that facility, you'd think of, or in your mind's eye, think of a machine shop with the ability to design, build, and test parts and products. We also have light manufacturing in support of our consumer brand, Wonder Alpine. And then the brand itself is based in Salt Lake City. And there's a small campus with the front building that faces out to the street close to downtown Salt Lake. Has what we call the Nest, which is effectively a storefront. It's a community center where we can welcome enthusiasts of the brand or enthusiasts of Checkerspot that want to learn more about the brand. In terms of the other part of your question regarding scale, here in Alameda, we were able to go all the way from strain to what's called refined bleach deodorized oil at lab scale. So think kilo quantities of material that's more than sufficient to support applications development and sampling and a range of testing. And then we step up to pilot scale fermentation. We continue to work with, and we're partnered with the ABPDU in Emeryville for access to pilot scale manufacturing. And then we are now routinely working at commercial scale in one of the market segments that we're serving through a contract manufacturing relationship with a group on the East Coast. And we have a partnership for full commercial production with the Dutch specialty chemical company Corbion that owns and operates a facility in Brazil that was purpose-built, designed for a heterotrophic or a fermentation-based microalgal process. That facility was designed to produce over 30 million gallons of oil from microalgae per year. And we've been working with them on the supply of oil from microalgae for several years now.
That's amazing. One thing I've always wondered, Charlie, is there's a theme to your brand. There's Checkerspot, there's the Wing platform, there's the Nest, and there's Wonder Alpine. How did you guys end up with these names?
So the way that we ended up with Checkerspot and the butterfly and Wonder Alpine and the owl, there's definite resonance, there's connectivity, and the obvious connection is flight, the obvious connection is nature, but where there's a little bit of divergence lies in with Checkerspot. When Scott and I started the company, we knew that performance was paramount. There's often conversation around performance versus sustainability. And by the way, we've always believed that was a false choice, a false narrative, that we could actually create exceptionally performing products that have the added benefit of being sustainable. You don't have to choose one versus the other. But especially at that time, there was this view in the world that it has to be one or the other. And so, okay, if there has to be one versus the other, it's performance. But sustainability and what we're doing and why we're doing this in the context of the climate crisis, that's a core value. It's a design constraint. And so when we were thinking about what to name the company, for reasons that I can elaborate on, I stumbled upon the Edith Checkerspot butterfly that is native, that inhabits the Sierra Nevada mountains. And it's been negatively impacted by climate change. And I just thought that there was really interesting symbolism in the butterfly. I also felt at the time that there were a lot of companies within biotechnology that had gene or zyme or tech sounding names, and doing something that was a little orthogonal or different appealed. And then there's something recognizing that we were building a materials company, something that's just really interesting or elegant about a butterfly's wings. You're talking about evolution to get exquisite structure, function, performance benefits. And I thought that was also pretty captivating, tied to the base technology, which is leveraging evolution. That's leveraging the fact that microalgae have evolved in the ways that it has that allows us to do the things that we're doing. So that was really cool. In contrast with the owl and Wonder Alpine, if you've ever seen an owl in the wild, you never forget it. There's just something about making eye contact with an owl that touches your soul, that really grabs you. And there are themes in the construction of the branding around Wonder Alpine where we really wanted to capture concepts of connectivity with nature, connectivity with being in these just really beautiful, intense, maybe even mystical settings that reach your soul. And the snowy owl brought that to life. They're beautiful creatures. They're unforgettable. And yeah, that was where that came from.
So you've met an owl's gaze. You saw them juggling the eye. Have you made eye contact with an owl?
I have. Yes.
Oh,
Not
wow.
on the snow in the alpine environment, but yes, in the backcountry without the snow. Yes.
Wow. It sounds like a very mystical moment.
Yeah. Right up there with mountain lion. Yeah.
And the butterfly. When you mentioned the butterfly wings, another thought that came to mind was when a butterfly flaps those wings, it causes radical change. And the idea of evolution and change, and things do need to change for the climate, just sounds like it all just works out very beautifully.
Yeah. And that definitely resonated. We thought of that as we were progressing. The other entendre that we identified was innovation. And when you think about the process of innovating, very often we think about it, or sometimes there are people that think about it as being defined teleologically. Like you could say, I'm going to invent a solution to this problem by date certain, and here's the budget, and here's how many people it's going to require, and here are the milestones on the way to inventing unobtainium. But the reality is more along the lines of you have directionality, but the natural world reveals itself, and it isn't quite teleological. I think more along the lines of discovery as opposed to invention. When you're in that frame of mind, there's some symbolism in the flight path of a butterfly. It's definitely directional. It's going from point A to point B, but it's circuitous. It's not linear. And that's what we've experienced, what we see in the context of innovation and discovery. Same is true, by the way, for backcountry travel. When you're on backcountry skis trying to achieve some objective, getting to a peak and then descending, you can have the best topo map. You can have an amazing plan of how you're going to navigate the hazards. But the reality is it's not until you're out in the environment and exploring and moving forward that you identify other hazards, or maybe there are opportunities and you can deviate from the plan. That's okay, as long as you're making progress and ultimately achieve the objective.
I love the idea of discovery over invention. In the biotech world, there's a lot of discovery to be had. When we look at all the different organisms, especially on the microorganism scale, there's so much we don't know yet. And so much we're discovering. And for you as CEO, you always have to have a vision of the future. What do you see as the future of Checkerspot, of biomaterials in general in 10 years, 30 years?
When I think forward, I have to acknowledge that I have a bit of a default setting that I always look backwards. I look to history for insights about what I think might be coming in the future. And when I look back at the most significant tectonic catalysts for change that I would argue, generally speaking, have advanced society, the catalysts for that are one, creativity and ingenuity. It's innovation. And second, business as a force for good. I think that when we look today at some of the most significant challenges that we're facing globally, that's probably an overemphasis on policy and on government, and there's going to be global cooperation to solve some of these challenges. Those things are important, but I believe that the best way to accelerate that is through business and making it clear how value can be created and then shared so as to affect behavioral changes. Because I think at the heart of any kind of change, social or otherwise, it comes down to behavior. And so when I think about Checkerspot in 10 to 20 years, it's really rooted or characterized by tapping into the ingenuity and enabling the creativity. It's a vision of empowerment, managing the risks associated with innovation and discovery, as we were talking about, but really targeting, taking aim at the kind of change that we need globally. And without question, the canary in the coal mine in that regard is the climate crisis. And I have confidence that with the things that we're and others are doing to create and to promote and to build the bioeconomy, that we have a shot at moving beyond petroleum. And everything that we now see causes harm from petroleum. Now, that's going to take time, but you gave a time frame of 10 to 20 years. And so I feel comfortable saying that.
That's fantastic. We could keep this conversation going on for a long time, but I know you're busy. And I just want to say thanks a lot, Charlie, for making this happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. It's always fun to chat with you guys.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I think that's a wrap.
Erum, what do you think of that interview?
That was amazing. Charles is a very philosophical guy.
Yeah, he is. It's funny because after we got to know each other, we had this conversation about the media and how we need more biotech media. And a few years ago, I'd written a blog post about the need for a fund that was investing in more biotech media. And then Charles, I mentioned to him, and he said that they had a service provider that had created a video that had been on the Checkerspot homepage for many years, and it was a video about him running. He's an ultra runner, meaning he runs these very long distances, and he is very much in tune with being out in nature.
Yeah, I really liked when he was talking about the genesis of their brand names and how he was looking into the eyes of an owl or a mountain lion. And I was like, wow. I could imagine how that could touch your soul. It's something that I've seen, not in person, but on Game of Thrones or something, where they just have close up of the owl's eyes. And you're like, whoa, that's really intense. But I do like the idea of the backcountry and going back to nature. And I feel like a lot of people do. There's this need because we're on screens all the time that when you do go out into nature, it's such a relief and a reminder of, okay, we're not just these digital creatures that just are clicking away and tapping on our keyboards, but there's a bigger world out there. And it was really nice to talk about that with him.
Yeah, he's not the only one. Amanda Park said that she reconnects with the ocean. She loves to go surfing and scuba diving. So she's another one of the people that we've talked to that specifically mentioned nature. And I am a big believer that if you're in biotech, you need to be a conservationist because so many of the the things that potentially we could use in biotechnology are out there in nature, and they're yet to be discovered. Some of the biggest discoveries that we use in the life sciences come from spending a lifetime looking at microbes. The polymerase chain reaction, which is a standard in all labs to create lots and lots of DNA, was discovered in a bacteria. CRISPR, which is a gene editing tool that was in the news a lot a few years ago, that was discovered by studying microbes and led to a Nobel Prize. There's 1 trillion species of microbes on the planet that are yet to be explored. Just the number of microbes on the planet, not counting the number of species, like I said, it's 1 trillion. The number of microbes is something like 10 to the 30th power. It's some crazy number. So there's a lot to explore right in front of us that we have a lot to learn from.
Yeah. And even like higher order organisms. I went to go see Neil deGrasse Tyson speak, and he was just talking briefly because, biology is not his main domain, but a scientist is a scientist of all sciences. Like, you just appreciate them all. And he talked about how he's excited for the day when we can leverage the technology or like the biology of a newt. So when we break our fingers or break our legs, we can just regenerate our bodies like the newt. So it was very interesting, but that's the new, but I'm sure there's lots of interesting biological processes that could be super, super helpful that we can't even imagine, right? Like, it's just so interesting. There's a whole world out there, and I'm excited to see what people start discovering, because this isn't about invention. This is about discovery, which Charlie did talk a lot about.
Right.
In this episode.
The other thing that was really great about hearing Charlie talk is this idea of getting their materials into the hands of people so that people can experiment with them and show us what's possible. I latched on to skateboard wheels because I have been a skateboarder. And then also the idea of vinyl, which is I have a vinyl collection. So when I first heard that, I latched right onto it. And didn't he say that like the fidelity was actually really pretty impressive for the vinyl records that were being made using those materials? I'm not sure there's a vinyl shortage, but I do know that the number of companies or facilities that are able to produce vinyl records is very small. If you're a band or a music producer and you think you're going to just order vinyl from some place, apparently it takes months to get your record produced because there's just not very many people that can do it. So I don't know if making vinyls from the materials that Checkerspot makes is going to help with that supply chain disruption.
Hey, look, you can go to checkerspot.com and order the Pollinator kit or the cast polyurethane system. And I'm sure like you can go antiquing and find some type of record mold and make things yourself. I don't know how that works actually, but besides records, there's so many things that we talked about, like making toys or frames or all these other things. I'm not a product designer, but it is something that you can certainly go down a rabbit hole, learn about. I'm sure there's YouTube videos on how to use polyurethane. I definitely want to. You can just order the kit on their website, and I'm going to just experiment. I just love to get my hands on products and see what I could do with them. It's something that is fun, just like creating things. Again, like, because we are creating a lot and it's very digital, but to be able to make things that are in physical form is just way more exciting.
I'm also very excited that we've reached a milestone with the podcast. This is our 20th episode. We've had some tremendous traction. We've had almost 4,000 plays. So that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
And thank you to all our listeners for listening, for giving us comments, for encouraging us. I can't wait till we get to episode 40.
I remember when we were first thinking about making the podcast, we're like, let's just make 50 episodes and see what happens. We didn't think we would get anyone listening until that point of our podcast development. People want to know what's going on in the world of biotechnology. So here we are. But there's also an exciting event that's going to be happening in a couple of weeks by one of the bigger players in the biotechnology space, Ginkgo Bioworks. They have their Ferment conference. And what is it really, Karl? You've been there before.
I've gone, I think, 3 or 4 times, and Ferment is Ginkgo's kind of annual report, love letter to the industry, gives them the opportunity to show off how people are using their platform, because the Ginkgo platform is a organism engineering platform. And there's a number of companies that they invest in or who are hired by Ginkgo to engineer organisms for them. And it's a showcase for them. There's going to be some really exciting talks. I'm sure we'll hear from Jason, the CEO founder of Ginkgo. I know that our friend Nicole Richards, who was on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, will be there speaking. There's someone from Salesforce who directs our AI research since AI has been in the news. Stephanie Culler, who's at Persephone Biosciences, which is a microbiome company that's focused on at least the way I understand it, the gut microbiome of neonates, will be there. In addition, Renee Wegwersen, who is a biosecurity person who had been at DARPA and is now the head of the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health. She's going to be speaking. She used to be at Ginkgo. Before that, she was at DARPA. I've been on a panel with her. Jasmina, who was on this podcast a couple of weeks ago, talking about archaea and the ingredients that they're making sustainably. She's also one of the people that is speaking. So there's going to be a lot of really interesting people who are talking about what's happening in biotechnology, how people are investing in it. I'm looking forward to seeing some talks about AI. And it's a nice get together for the community. Probably about 300 people come together in Boston. A lot of friends, people we've known for a really long time. And it's always good to meet new people that we don't know.
Yeah, we'll certainly have a lot of intel to share from that conference after. So stay tuned for a rundown of what happened at Ferment.
Exactly. So I guess that's the pod.
You guys know the drill. Everything's in the show notes. Certainly any companies we spoke about during the episode or any people that we mentioned or references are there in the show notes. Any questions, any comments, please reach out to us. We would love to hear from you.
Thank you for listening, and we hope to hear from you soon. Thank you.
Ta-ta.